Welcome to a new episode of the Analytics Experience. Today we're here with Jessica Iriarte, Alfredo Serrano, and Bruno Carrera.
Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much for having me.
How's everything going with you?
Everything is going great. I'm really excited to be here, so I'm really excited to talk to you too today. So.
Yeah, it's a pleasure for us to have you here today. Jessica, before we start talking about different topics, you can introduce a little bit to the audience about yourself, how you end up here talking with us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just with your background, what you've been doing,
Absolutely. My name is Jessica Iriarte. I'm originally from Venezuela, but now I live in Denver, Colorado. My career journey really started working as a field engineer in offshore rigs in South America. So my background actually is as a petroleum engineer. I actually have my undergrad and master's degree in petroleum engineering. After working as a field engineer, I also worked in Europe, leading different offshore and onshore oil field projects. And while I was always very excited to work in operations and I'm very passionate about it, I was always so interested about the science behind all of these projects and the data that we're collecting. So I really wanted to take my career further, or that step further, into becoming more technical. So then I moved to Colorado to pursue my master's degree in petroleum engineering. So I was doing research on geomechanics, and it was experimental. So I was collecting a lot of data in a lab with the experiments I was running. I had different sensors. I was collecting time series data, and I was doing this for several months. So that for me became the point where I had to take my skills to the next level of, okay, how do I handle all of these different files I'm collecting? How do I merge them? And then how do I even analyze all these data to come up with some insightful results and conclusions for my thesis? About the same time, I also started working with a tech company in oil and gas. So I really started more as a subject matter expert, where I brought that expertise on handling these time series data, but also being the person in the field that used to collect that data for completion jobs. So I started as running research and to using that research to drive customer engagement and to innovate just on ways to look at these data, because it really was data that had been overlooked by the industry in general in the past. Eventually, that led me to lead my own research and data science team, and eventually to switch industries.
That's super interesting. And as a matter of fact, I feel like I can speak for both of us that your background is so interesting, because going from such a technical field like already engineering is, and then going to an industry that is, it feels like it doesn't get enough credit, like the oil and gas, that it has so much weight on the GDP. Like for example, the U.S. Like, could you tell us a bit about your work exactly? Do you feel like it was too technical? Because as you were saying before, you were an SME for a big tech company, right? So how do you feel like those engineering skills help you out also later doing into that transition of working with more data?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was very passionate about the data, and I think that regardless of which industry you work on, you have to have a certain passion for the data you're working on or the technology you are building to really drive that innovation. And for me, I was so passionate about these data, I could really see a graph and understand immediately what was happening in the field just by looking at it. So that helped me a lot when I was either doing research and publishing a lot of this research, collaborating in the industry with other experts on understanding how to automate analyzing that data and make it faster for people that are in the field. Right? How can we make it easier for people in the field making decisions, automating that, just recognizing events that are happening within this data and whatnot. So I think that being an engineer, being a data scientist, or being in research, there are a lot of skills that overlap. I wouldn't say, that I had to switch from one to the other. I had I was kind of doing a little bit of everything for a
Mhm.
little bit there. And there are just a lot of similarities when it comes to engineering or data science. There are a lot of transferable skills. At the end of the day, you're problem solving, right? You're trying to identify the real existing problem, it, even to assess if there is one to begin with, because sometimes we, as engineers or scientists, love to sometimes overcomplicate things or build things just because they're fun and there wasn't a real problem to solve there. So identifying the real problem before designing a solution, and then selecting the tools that you use for executing that plan. So whether that is using physical, physics fundamentals, or modeling, or data-driven approaches, I think the overall process is very similar.
That sounds super interesting, as a matter of fact. Yep.
Jessica, I have a question for you. I was seeing in your profile that you have almost 7 years in data science, but your first experience was as a research engineer, and then you were a manager. What is the difference between like handling data as a perspective as a researcher or as a manager
Hmm, that's
for
a great
you?
question. Yeah. Um, Well, as a researcher or as an individual contributor, you are way closer to the data. You are so much more focused on the one topic or the one type of data. As a manager, you really take a step back. You have to let go of that, control of everything, to be more of an orchestrator. So again, when you are the individual contributor or the researcher or the data scientist, you're the one that knows everything of the project, everything of the data, how the data was collected, how is it
Yeah.
being used by the model, and whatnot. When you switch to a manager role or to a project lead role, it really is a big step, and it's not for everyone. Just as being an individual contributor forever is not for everyone as well.
Sure.
So you have to kind of be willing to let go and delegate to that team that you have, and let them be the experts.
Completely agree with you. Especially, like, I wanted to mention something very important, which is you mentioned so many transitions over your years. Would you say then you would have more of an overview as a manager, in which you have to delegate tasks, you have to understand, the background of the data you're collecting, analyzing, and how to also deliver the results to the stakeholders that you be talking to, or you would have to report to, right? Like, it feels very different because I've never been on a managerial role in that sense. But as an individual contributor, is what you say, you're so close to the model, and you actually get to work with the data day to day, that it feels like a very interesting perspective what you're bringing on, especially with so many years in the field. Bruno, you wanted to add something onto that?
100%.
And I wanna ask, like, when you were mentioning the career change of when you started involving more with data, we're talking about the similarities between engineering and data, about the problem solving. But what's the biggest challenge for you changing and making that transition to data? What was the biggest challenge for you when you make the change?
Yeah. From like a traditional engineering role to
I think about when you, yeah, about the traditional engineering role to the research engineer position. Like, what was like the change for you when you were like purely engineering and when you changed to data science?
yeah.
And the biggest challenge for you could be a technical thing. It could be more like a mentality thing. What were like the biggest challenge for you in that sense?
Um, I mean, there's a lot more coding. So if that's not your strength,
Okay.
that's a big challenge. Um, your way, like, you don't always understand what's happening behind these data. And that's a huge challenge when for me, I did, which wasn't necessarily my personal challenge, but that was like my biggest value that I added to my team, because they were all pure data scientists, if you will, and I was not. So I was bringing that background of like, what is the data saying? So sometimes I would say the biggest difference is like having the context of what the data is telling you. Because a lot of times what we were trying to understand is like, we were looking at pressure curves, right? The pressure is changing, the pressure is changing slowly or abruptly. What is that pressure change telling you? And sometimes it doesn't really mean anything. So you might train a model and the model might say, hey, there is a pressure change. What is happening? And it really doesn't mean anything because of X or Y. So having that context, I think is the biggest difference. And then personally, because coding is not something that I necessarily love to like do day to day, that was my biggest challenge.
Hmm.
But I kind of play to my strengths and to my greatnesses in that way, and that's why kind of I transitioned to a leadership role where I will hire people that were way better than me in coding, and
Yeah.
we will,
To, to be to be honest, To be honest, Jessica, I love what you mentioned because Alfredo and I, we always have discussion. Alfredo is more a technical background than I do, but I come from a finance, more business oriented and finance background. But I am a big data major, and now I see the other side of the scope too. Because when I see like how people from data now see finance is different from how people from finance see data,
Yeah.
and I think like having that, and also, I'm not a huge fan of coding, but I learn in school and I continue developing my skills because it's completely necessary to do it. Here we have a guy that just for pleasure. He
Yeah.
like to code.
Exactly. Like Bruno brings a really good point. I'm quite the opposite, right? Like I've always loved coding, and I found super interesting what you mentioned, which is whether when you're in data science, you always have to play like to your advantages, and as well, so you're this, or let's say like less skills, right? So you were mentioning maybe you were not that good at coding when you started, but because you had such a big background and your knowledge about the topic was so good,
I think that's the key.
as a matter of fact, you were an SME, right? And that's how you matter expert. That's what you brought to the table. And it's so interesting to see how on a data science environment, there's always a place for everyone, whether you're bringing the knowledge, whether you're bringing the skills, or you're bringing the leadership role or leadership skills, as a matter of fact, right? So I think that's something very important to mention. Like, it's not necessarily that you need to be coding 24/7 to lead people in data science, and it doesn't even matter as a, like to an extent how much coding you can bring, but more of the problem solving that you bring to the table, which is what you mentioned in the first place, right?
And also I wanna have a further mention asking this. You were more in the investigating part of it in the researching position. But when you have to we always talk about in this podcast that being a data scientist or being a data analyst, you need to develop your soft skills and your communication skills. And in your context that you were talking about really complicated and technical data, how do you was the dynamic with you when with the people that were
Stakeholders.
yeah with the people that were working with you like to be able to communicate in the same language and taking care of that information was intact. How was that experience for you?
I love that. That's like one of my favorite things, because I think that I'm very good at translating these complex solutions and complex technical concepts to executives or to leadership that speak, like you say, a different language. And that makes me very
Hmm.
good at selling my team's work. So my team is, we identify a problem, we go talk to the stakeholder, or they brought a problem, we try to, offer a few different solutions. This is what we can do for you. First, I'm very good at like dial down the solution because again, individual contributors tend to be over eager of trying to build the most complex and exciting solution, and sometimes that's not what the business needs.
Yeah.
And that is so important. You don't want to waste people's time. You don't want to waste your effort, and you don't want to over-engineer solutions. So, and then helping them scope that down, and then helping once we have a solution, translate the value of that solution to stakeholders and to executives is something I'm very good at. And I think because maybe not being the most technical person in the coding and in the modeling side helps me keep my language kind of high level enough to be able to communicate among different like disciplines. And it's not only to leadership, it's also, leading projects that involve working with the DevOps team and with the MLOps team and with the data engineering team and anyhow, like having to like orchestrate all of these different teams that basically speak different languages is so important. With data science, especially because I think it's still so misunderstood by so many people in the industry.
Sure. Especially with your managing people as well from like different backgrounds and different skill sets. Like I feel like that's a really good point. Like being able to be high level, but also being able to understand the technical people as well as the business people who just want the results at the end of the day. You may not care about the complexity of the model that you guys are developing or the solution, as a matter of fact,
They don't
but
have
more about
time
what
to
you guys are
understand
bringing
it.
as an output, right? Exactly. They'll be like, give me a 1 minute presentation of this because I don't have enough time throughout my day to just like listen to you, right?
And if you have to give one advice to someone else, like want to change to data science like you did, what do you recommend to that person if they want to make exactly the same change you did?
That is a very hard question. Let me think about it. I don't think there is one advice. So maybe I can, and I don't think there is one recipe for career changes or
Mm-hmm.
breaking into industry. I think every industry is so different and will require, and everyone has a different background and will require a different path. But I can definitely give my advice from like my personal experience. I think for any career move or any career um, change that you make, you really have to always start by identifying what motivates you and what pushes you. In this case, if you want
Yeah,
to switch industry, what motivates you to switch industry? What is your drive, and what is your cue? Like, what is telling you this is the right time to make that switch, and how are you going to get there? I would say personally, I've made several career moves, and my drive was I wanted to be a part of a digital transformation that was happening in the oil and gas industry. So I was doing everything in my power to stay current, to stay on top of the new technologies. And I know I was a part of that, but it came to a point where it felt somehow like I had reached a cap of learning and growth.
yeah,
And that was my cue. That was my cue for saying this is the time to go find my next challenge. I think we had talked about this already, but the how is, I think, how you make that move or how you go about
mm-hmm.
finding your next step is identifying your strengths. Really, you have to play for your
Exactly.
strengths. So I know personally that I learn the best by being immersed in a situation. So I like being hands-on. I like being involving myself in, say, a project or an industry. And that's just, I'm very good at learning by observing and analyzing. So that's one of my strengths. So I know that rather than taking 2 years of a master's degree in data science, I just have to put myself in that situation or do the job kind of thing. And then, as we mentioned before, I'm very good at translating complex projects
Yeah,
or translating among different industries. So that was a skill I was already bringing, among other ones, that I can bring into a new role. So I think I definitely follow this set of fundamentals, and I'm not afraid of embracing risks to redefine my career outside of a traditional path, especially for a petroleum engineer. And I think that that's very key. It's easier said than done. You have to be willing to take risks, and they're going to be very
sure.
uncomfortable. So I have, worked in the field. I've worked in office jobs, more like project managing different projects internationally. I worked in research in academia, in tech within oil and gas, and lately in tech outside of oil and gas in a new industry for me. And some of these positions have also been in different countries and different continents, speaking different languages. So a lot of sacrifices in my personal life, a lot of changes, and always pushing me out of my comfort zone. So very long answer, sorry. But if I was to summarize, I
No,
would say,
Yeah, no, that's
to be
perfect.
honest, I was gonna say, like, for a hard question, that was an awesome answer.
Yeah,
It was awesome.
and you know what's curious? What you just said really aligns with our motto, which is this is an industry and this is a field that you get to learn by doing hands-on, by practicing, and by getting into situations, as you were saying, and problems that you gotta face. Because I don't know about you, and I want to ask you about what were the exact resources maybe that you use, whether if it was books, boot camps, or like online courses. But me and Bruno have found over the years that for us as well, it's better to actually like develop our own projects. Like I created a website a couple years ago with my portfolio of projects, and that's the best way that I learned by myself. because I was just getting into like, I got a random data set, found problems that I wanted to solve, and solve them through, some data analysis, and then I expressed the results into like some data visualization. But we found that your message aligns perfectly with what we've been saying for
And
almost a
also
year.
adding what both of you said, it's the only way to learn about this is to hands-on. Like
Yep.
Jessica was mentioning, like go in the masters, I prefer to work in the field to have the experience of how it is. And Alfredo just mentioned, like when he was doing his research on his projects, like hands-on. I think hands-on is the key actually to pursue a career in this field.
Especially what you were saying, that coding might not be your best strength at that time. It's so interesting to see that even though you might not enjoy coding that much in the beginning, you still like put yourself in that situation to learn, which shows a lot of discipline. So again, it's a really good answer, and
And
sounds really
also
super
really
interesting.
encouraging that you were saying the sacrifices that involve also be in this field and but I think I have a question for you. And this is our last question. If you never become a data engineer,
If you would have
a
never
data
become, right?
science or petrol engineer, what else do you want to become? If you never have any of the, if you, let's say the Jessica of 18 years old, and she never become a petroleum engineer or
Yeah.
data science, what else do you think you're gonna be right now?
Gosh.
It's a tough
I
question.
mean, I love philanthropy. I love being involved
Hmm.
Okay.
in nonprofit. So, and that's kind of like I'm just gonna talk about like what are my retirement goals. So, if I didn't do what I'm doing right now in retirement, what I would like to do is working profit, probably something related to women, to Latinas. And then I absolutely love plants and gardening. It brings me so much joy. So I don't know, something related to gardening.
That sounds amazing.
So it was really encouraging and powerful.
Absolutely, and especially like what you said. Obviously, you're Latina, as you were saying, with a huge background, and like we feel like your message right now gets to empower a lot of girls that might want to go into STEM and into research and data science, and also be able to lead teams, which I think is something super empowering. Because right now we don't get to see many female leads in data science. At least, like I get to see like a lot of online reviews about this topic, and like it sounds super interesting to see that you are the person giving the extra mile, and you're one of like the people that are trying to like make a change. So props to you.
Yeah, Alfredo, we always mention our last three interviews, including this one, were women that were senior in the data science field, and we are like really we admire that like really much because I think there should be more women being senior in the position of data science in the field, sorry, of data science. I think thank you so much, Jessica, for your feedback, for your honest questions, sorry, honest answers, and Alfredo, something you want to add up?
I just want to say that I had a lot of fun. Hopefully you get to enjoy the interview. But for sure, thanks so much for giving such honest answers, and for showing us that there's a way to like, going from engineering, which is something so technical, to going into like research and then into data science and then to leading people. I feel like that's something super inspiring for a lot of people and our audience that might be listening to us. So we really appreciate you having on the podcast, and hopefully we get to see you again.
Yeah, thank you
Thank you
so much for
so
having
much for
me.
your time.
It was so much fun
Absolutely.
talking to you.
Thank you so much for that, Jessica.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Okay, have a good one.
You too.